My name is Wendy, and I will be presenting on one of the many pressing issues that pertain to First Nations in Canada today, which is the treatment of Indigenous child welfare by the Canadian government. In 2016, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruled that the Canadian government has been discriminating against First Nations children in its delivery of child welfare services on reserve. In this landmark ruling, the federal government has been found to have discriminated against First Nations children in reserves by failing to provide the same level of child welfare services as outside of reserves. The tribunal stated that Canada must fully implement the Jordan's Principle, which stipulates that no Indigenous child should suffer denials, delays, or disruptions of health services available to other children due to jurisdictional disputes. While 3 notices of compliance have been sent to the government since the ruling, there has been no notable response or action taken. Cindy Blackstock, the executive director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, views this as Canada saying that it's above the law, that it doesn't owe First Nation children equality in this country. The Canadian government has appointed Dr. Cynthia Wesley-Eskimo to the position of Ministerial Special Representative in the midst of pressures to act on the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling. Wesley-Eskimo is described to have a lack of preparedness, with the superficiality of her position, and a lack of agenda and goal in the issue, which causes concern in the point of her appointment. The opposition and various Indigenous leaders have accused the government as using the appointment as a stall tactic to delay the compliance with the ruling, as its action does not seem to be leading to any sort of real solution. NDP member Charlie Angus calls the discrepancy in child welfare services as a systemic racist discrimination, which is the consequence of the historical impacts of colonialism, including the uneven power dynamics between Canadian government and Indigenous peoples, discrepancies in treatment between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples in all aspects, etc. Canada has a history of the poor treatment of First Nations child welfare services. In residential schools, for example, there was the gross disregard of child welfare, including abuse of all forms, harsh discipline, poor nutrition diets, in order to kill the Indian and the child. This was seen as an extreme form of assimilation. During the 60s scoop, the Aboriginal children were taken by child welfare agencies, given inadequate care by the government and child welfare workers in association with its connecting the child with culture. And the welfare workers were mainly untrained, unwilling, or unable to deal with the years of trauma experienced by the Aboriginal children. The current issue spoken about today is proof of the continued neglectful treatment and lack of knowledge on Aboriginal child welfare. And so the problem here is that child protection is currently delegated to the provinces and the government. However, the abilities of the government to perform are called into question after the slow or non-existent distribution of child social services for childcare in Aboriginal communities in comparison to non-Aboriginal. What stems from this is the fear of unnecessary removal of the First Nations children from families because of inequitable funding. One of the solutions proposed is the transitioning of the responsibilities of delivering child welfare services back to the communities. While the BC government has announced its intent to do so, progress continues to be slow. Frustrated First Nations leaders intend to go directly to Ottawa to begin negotiations for this transition. Without doing so, the Indigenous community continues to feel as wards of the state, with the undermining of traditional governance and Aboriginal self-governance, where the Canadian government has questioned the ability of First Nations communities to take responsibility of childcare in the broken system that the Canadian government has created itself, and also the evidence of the continued impact of the controlling nature of the Indian Act. And so what now? Cheryl Cadney of the First Nations Summit says the provinces have the ability to focus on child well-being from a preventative perspective. Because a family can't put food on the table, they think it is a child protective issue. If a family can't put food on the table, let's deal with the root causes, she says. Shown on the screen is a letter from Suzanne Anton, Attorney General Minister of Justice, in a letter to the Children's Representative on First Nations for the self-governance on child welfare and intent to transition the control over the Aboriginal community. And so moving forward, what's happening right now is that First Nations leaders in BC are working to reclaim the control over the child welfare system within their communities. Tacit approval given by the BC government, and talks in the House to transfer the jurisdiction for services to be transferred to the First Nations communities. The question now is whether this rushed transition, without a true framework, will be sustainable in the long run. Without a seamless and coordinated transition, this creates a whole new level of confusion. It is clear that there needs to be cooperation between the government and First Nations people to create a long-term solution. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time.